Well, welcome back from lunch. I am now taking on a different role here this afternoon in interviewing our next guest, who is Karen Marciniak, who is a vice president at Two Sigma. And we're going to be talking today about this idea of people analytics. I mentioned it this morning in my talk, and as I was telling Karen, I had no idea what people analytics was until a couple of years ago. My Atlantic magazine shows up in the mailbox, and there's this scary headline saying, "They're watching you at work." And it has a bunch of people with cameras at the water cooler, and it just had this ominous headline. And I read the story, which basically was that all this data now, this big data was we could track it at work to see who were the most successful employees and why they were successful. It got me really interested. A couple months later, I went to the second annual, at that time, People Analytics conference. There's a whole conference on this at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where I realized there's all these companies out there doing it. In fact, at that conference, they said it's one of the fastest growing HR functions at organizations around the country. What is it? So tell us, what is people analytics?
So in its simplest form, I would say people analytics is using data about people in the workplace. And so then the next question, of course, is, well, what do you mean data about people? What type of data do you have about people in the workplace? Some examples of that data is really more or less every behavior that happens within HR. So hiring, transfers, promotions, performance reviews, learning and development courses, and then of course terminations. All of that is tracked in most companies. In most big companies, there are all sorts of tools and systems that track that movement of employees as they move through their life cycle in the workforce. I'm sure what we'll talk a lot about today is the recruiting side, and that's where typically the big data side comes in. Even for a company as small as mine, it's about 1,200 people. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of resumes, thousands of applications, thousands of interviews. And we need a way to filter through that data to get, to figure out who are the best candidates that we want to interview. And you can't interview them all at once. You should probably rank order which ones you think are going to be the best in the beginning. And it's a really fun way to use data in the workplace.
Okay, so let's talk more then specifically about how you use it. Okay, so you have 1,200 employees. You have all these data points on them, right? So you know why people, how they come into the company, what they do when they're there, why they leave, when they leave, how they survive and thrive. So you have all these different data points. You then translate that in how you hire, because you look at your most successful employees and you say, how can we get more of them?
Yes.
So tell us
exactly.
practically how this works.
Yeah. So in most companies, there's a performance review process, and we're able to identify our top talent from that process, and then we can look backwards. We can look at, what did we know about these top talent employees when they applied to us? Was there something in their resume that stuck out? Are they all from a certain school, a certain major? Do they all have some sort of previous work experience or no work experience? And so we take that data and we look at patterns in the things that we saw early on, and then the ideal situation is you're able to then apply those patterns to new people coming in. So we say, hey, here are some characteristics of people who are really high performers here that we see early on in that recruiting process. And now I'm seeing these same characteristics with this person, with this candidate, this group of candidates. Let's pay extra attention to them. Let's interview them first.
So I know that these algorithms are kind of secret for most companies. What can you share with us about what are those attributes? What are those characteristics that you tend to use, and which ones were most surprising to you when you started using them? There's a lot of assumptions in hiring. You know, we tend to hire people from elite schools. We tend to hire people with certain GPAs, all that other stuff. Does any of that matter?
So most of the research that you can actually read about that has been publicly displayed, it finds that those schools and GPA don't matter. It does depend on the role. Certainly this answer is different for different roles. But some of the most interesting things that we've found, and again, you can read about these, are things like grammatical errors in resumes are a much better predictor of how well you perform at the company than anything you really did that you demonstrate on the resume.
Is that because that shows attention to detail?
Yes,
Okay.
it does. Another really strange one is applying which browser you used when you applied to the job is actually predictive of how what type of employee you are, and that's because people who are really interested in finding a great solutions for things install not the default browser. They use not the default browser when they're working on the internet. So using Chrome instead of whatever came installed on your laptop.
So if we use IE, we're in trouble.
That's not good. It's not good.
Sorry, Microsoft.
Right. So some of these things are what I would call metadata, which is data about data, and things that you wouldn't even imagine could matter end up being really interesting on our side.
So what has this done for how you hire? How has this changed how you hire, especially, I don't know how many new college grads you hire or people at that level, but how has it changed that particular level of hiring at your organization?
So I would say in general, what's interesting about this is the needle moves slowly. So people still like to make people decisions based on what they experience, what they feel, and their experience with that candidate. So the needle has moved slightly, but I want to caveat that with, just like most things, change is hard. And as humans, we like to make human decisions, not purely based on data. With that in mind, I do think that this has helped us be more efficient at finding the types of candidates that are going to be most successful in jobs, particularly in really just stack ranking. So there's a whole stack of resumes that we have to get through. Is there some way that we can pull out from that stack the ones that we think are going to be most successful, so we can talk to them first?
Okay, so again, let's think about we're at a conference here about credentials. The assumption has always been that the signal of the degree is strong. It gets stronger as you move up the rankings, which is why my contention is always that people don't want to get into Harvard and go to Harvard because the education is necessarily better, but because they're essentially buying into a network, right? A network that will then land them a job. If people analytics, let's look a little bit into the future. If this starts to take off in a bigger way at more companies and goes deeper, does that mean that that degree signal is lessened in any way based on how you're already using people analytics, or does it just is it just different?
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that it will be lessened. I think that the degree is always going to be important, mainly because, again, humans make the hiring decisions in the end, and most people in those hiring seats have degrees themselves. Mm-hmm. And so the importance of that degree, I think, is still going to be essential. I think there's probably a lot that we can do to better signal what in that degree is really important and what in that degree is, as a student, going to make you a better candidate and a better employee. Okay.
So you talked about how humans obviously still hire. So, in my book, I profiled Credit Suisse, which is a big user of people analytics. And one of the things that they noticed when they started using it more was that they broadened the number of institutions that they recruited at, right? So they tended to go to more state schools than they had gone to before. But then, at some point in the process, a human still is doing the hiring. And so they found that candidates from these new schools, for example, got only so far through the process until they hit that human person who still had that bias that, this person from X school is not qualified. Or in other cases, because they had so many alumni from these other schools, they helped coach those students through. And it didn't end up changing. It changed their recruiting process, but it ended up not changing their hiring process in the end. So how do we kind of square those two things, right? So this is obviously changing recruiting, but are you seeing it also change actual hiring decisions on the end?
I think in many companies it has
Okay.
changed hiring decisions. I think there are a lot of really interesting tools and technology out there now that actually makes the resume blind in kind of some of the categories that we'd want it to be blind in. So kind of it covers up a name, it can cover up school, anything that indicates gender or race. And so potentially some of those conversations maybe should be had with no discussion around which school they went to, but instead just the skills, the types of courses they took, and what they learned.
Mm-hmm. So when I first read about this, and when maybe some people in this room read about this, they were like, wow, this is pretty scary, right? It's again, kind of in some ways how applicant tracking systems years ago started making everybody just a number, right? And Peter Capelli at Wharton School writes about this a lot, where applicant tracking systems are so particular about what they need is they end up throwing out a lot of qualified applicants. And so what ends up happening is that applicants start to game the system. Can this system be gamed in a similar way? So for example, if people start to figure out what are the attributes you're looking for, they can start to game the system when they're applying to X company?
Yeah. I think to a certain extent, probably in small amounts. I do still think that that a lot of what you do with your resume, and again, how you apply, which browser you use, these types of things probably are less likely to be gamed. And the good news is those things, like having grammatical errors on your resume, obviously you could have many people proof your resume, but the good news is some of those things are really predictive of performance on the job, which in contrast to a lot of the hiring decisions being made based on biases. The school that you went to or the major you received aren't actually predictive of things that matter on the job. So in a way, taking the humans out of this process to a certain extent, I think actually does open up jobs to a greater variety of people.
And so, in other words, it could democratize kind of
Yes.
hiring much more than it has been in the past. And are you finding that at your own organization?
So we are early on in our process,
Okay.
but I think what I've seen from lots of big companies that have been using this for a while. So Google is a great example, and of course Laszlo has a book about this. It does sound like that has been successful in companies that have been doing it for a while and have also gone through the process of helping interviewers understand their biases and kind of put those aside and really have trained the full workforce.
Okay. The book you referenced, by the way, is Laszlo Block, who was the former head of people or whatever.
Yes.
He had an odd title.
Head of HR.
Head of HR,
Yeah.
essentially at Google, which is a great book. He's no longer there. What other insights can you share about what you have learned about who succeeds at your company?
So I think that, again, depends a lot on the role. I think for some of the...
So tell us, maybe that might help. What are the different types of roles that you're hiring for and the skill set you're looking for?
I think the main, the work that I've done in my career has been mainly with engineers. So engineers are, software engineers are obviously like gold these days. Everybody needs as many as they possibly can. And they're really hard to get to land to your company because there is so much competition for them. And so figuring out what is it about an engineering degree, engineering skills, or an engineer themselves that makes them more likely to come to your company and then also stay at your company is really important. And we're still figuring that out. That's definitely, it's a world that's changing very, very quickly. And I think that of course, data science is also kind of meeting the data where it is, and sooner or later we'll figure out some really great insights. But the main problem that we're trying to solve is definitely trying to find the engineers, trying to keep the engineers, and not lose them to so many competitors.
And which is why there's not a lot of sharing between
Yes.
companies on this, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of it seems to me, a very secretive process per company.
Yeah, I think that's something that I wish people analytics could be more like academia in that sense, because we only can continue to move forward if we can build on each other's insights and research. And so things like the Wharton People Analytics Conference that you referred to is a great place for all of us to just try to learn from each other and build on that instead of reinventing the wheel.
We're going to spend about a couple more minutes with Q&A, but then we'll open it up to the audience. So we have in this room a lot of people from in higher ed who are thinking about the future of credentials of all forms, trying to figure out what they communicate and how they communicate, right? So largely have been paper currency, and we're now moving into more electronic currency. As you think about what they can do, what institutions can do to better communicate what their students have learned, the underlying competencies, the underlying skills that they have, what advice or what particular takeaways do you have that they can use at their own institutions?
Yeah, I think that we're speaking two different languages. I think that on the university side, there's a set of terms, a set of terminology and skills that exist in the university. And then on the business side, there's a totally separate set of terms.
Give an example.
Project management. So project management is a key skill that we need on the business side. But for most students probably have some project management experience, but they just have no idea that they need to call it that. That means organizing a group of people around an outcome and seeing it through towards the end and getting stakeholder sign-off on things. This happens all the time in the classroom in other forms, but students don't know to put project management on their resume, and so they might get overlooked in that sense. I think a lot of the skills can easily just be translated just by changing what you call it, even though it's the same thing.
So part of this is a translational thing. Yeah. There was a comment after my presentation this morning around the role of career services on college campuses was supposed to help students translate.
Yes.
I'm never quite sure they actually do that though, right? They help them put together a resume. When I used to sit on interviews with new graduates or students are about to graduate and employers, they're very good at repeating what's on their resume, right, but they're not very good at translating what it means, right? Those underlying skills. Yep. And that's something that we seem as adults to eventually learn, right? We're able to transfer our learning in one place and apply it somewhere else. Whose responsibility is that for people just coming into the job market?
Yeah, I think it's everybody's. Mm-hmm. I think it's the students' responsibility for sure to ask questions so they can figure things out. I think it's the universities. I also think it's your first manager on the job, and we have to find on the business side managers who want to take on that process, who want to train students to use the skills that they know they have, but in this new way. I think it's everybody's responsibility.
So do you see some institutions or some people able to do it better than others coming in the door?
Yes.
Where are they getting this from? What is helping them? Is it because they've interned with you and so they know that better, or what's helping?
Certainly internships are very, very important. I think the companies that have done this really well are the companies that have almost sometimes they're called boot camp. Their processes 6-8 weeks, sometimes longer, for all new grads to come sit in a room together, learn about the business, learn about the skills, the tools, the language, and just get a better understanding of the culture. And after that process, they're much better able to communicate with others.
Mm-hmm. Seems like colleges should be able to do that though, right? And they're not.
That would be great. That would be great if they could. It would certainly make hiring managers, or in other words, the manager who's going to take on the new grad, very, very happy to see an undergraduate resume that has on it all the skills that they know they're looking for.
So one last question before we open it up to the audience. Again, we're talking here about credentials, transcripts, degrees, resumes. How much does that matter in the hiring process? We're talking about people analytics, so a new way of hiring. Yeah. So how much do these kind of old school assets matter in hiring today? But more important, let's look ahead 5-10 years. Yeah. How much are they going to matter, in your opinion, in HR in 5 or 10 years? And what's hiring going to look like in 5 or 10 years?
I think they'll continue to matter to a certain extent just because things do move so slowly. But I think what hiring will look like in the future is going to be looking at a lot more of your digital footprint, for lack of a better phrase. So we all have an online life, and whether that's LinkedIn in a very formal way, or it's the code that you contribute to an online code base in a kind of less formal way, I think those types of things are really going to start to matter, because it's going to become extremely easy for companies to go out, find everything that you've done on the internet, everything you've contributed, everything you've written, and seek out the people who have written great code, or have published a really interesting blog that gets a lot of activities. I think those things will start to matter.
Okay, so all fine and good. Now I'm just going to ask one more question based on that. In about an hour or so, we're going to have Michael Roth, president of Wesleyan, here, who talks about the strength of the liberal arts, right? And so what if you graduate with an English degree, which is, and number one skill most companies want today is good writing, but you don't have those specific skills you could display in ways, right? These things called project management and coding and all that other stuff. Does that put students who have a traditional liberal arts background at a disadvantage in this new world, or do you think they just kind of have to sell themselves differently? I
think it's just different. I think that if, searching for a corporate position, which would include people who have an English degree, you wouldn't be looking for a code history, or potentially even project management. You'd be looking for things like a writing sample. And is this person going to be able to translate a complicated situation into a very concise email that is appropriate for leadership? I think that there will definitely continue to be a closer relationship between what you're doing on the job and the interview process. So all the research finds that this is not rocket science, but the closer you can evaluate that skill that they're actually going to use on the job, the more predictive that interview is. So I think that will continue to evolve, not just on the engineering kind of hard skill side, but also in the softer skills.
We have a couple minutes here before we move on. Questions from the audience about, yes. Whoever has the microphone, back in the back there. There we go.
Right there. Here we go. Thanks so much. My name's Justine Monroe. I guess I had an observation and then a quick question. But observation was in relation to your point that we're dealing with humans and they're the ones that make these biased decisions, so let's have more machines. And it was good that we did get into, can we reduce bias in humans, because that's an area that we've worked a lot in diversity, and I think the recognition that you can take a new recruit from a diverse background with a different type of, background, but unless you've actually changed the way that people think in that organisation, that person's not going to stay or actually bring that diversity to it. So we actually have to work with the people if we're going to see change in that way, I think. But the other question, I guess, is the whole thing about people analytics, by looking at what people who've succeeded in your organisation to date have done, is that you're then only finding the people who can do the things that everybody's always done. So if you're actually looking for people who can change the whole game and respond to a very disrupted world, aren't you going to have to think about this really differently and go back to much more core ideas about what the value of creativity and innovation and curiosity and skills like that?
Yes,
Great
absolutely. Yeah. So that is exactly why people analytics exists, and not just engineers who dabble in HR. So it's very, very important to understand the implications of, say we write an algorithm, and if the algorithm says, all of your people at the company who've done really well are all purple people, and so therefore we should hire more purple people because clearly that's what matters. That obviously could be really not great. So applying research, there's lots of research on things that matter, and understanding the data well enough to know, this is just giving us more of the same. It's kind of overfit to the group of people that we have who are successful. Knowing that and taking a step back and building a model in a different way is really important.
So in other words, it's a piece of a larger puzzle.
Yes.
It's not, otherwise we could just have a computer do all the hiring.
Right.
That's exactly. Microphone over here, yes.
Okay, so I'm Kim Elias from UC San Diego. This is new to me, so thank you for sharing. A lot of institutions are looking at and further encouraging students to engage in co-curricular opportunities and develop co-curricular records. In your performance indicators of kind of the successful people. Have you seen any trends or patterns of those candidates or people having co-curricular involvement?
So I'll just speak to the research that I understand. What I've heard really matters is growth in those co-curricular activities. So starting as just a member of the team and ending as the president or the leader, I think those things tend to matter a lot because it shows that you've taken on more and more responsibilities, that you're respected amongst your peers, that you've stuck with something even when things are probably difficult. So I think that's found to be much more predictive than just whether you were in music or sports, things like that.
Well, and I know from the work that Credit Suisse did on people analytics, they saw leadership matters, but not elected leadership, but actually earned leadership. So going back to the captain of a team, the idea is that you had to work hard over course, time on task and growth in that area, rather than just being the most popular person.
Yeah.
Other questions? Anybody else? We have one right here. Carol.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you've touched on this, but I would appreciate more elaboration. I was struck this morning when Jeff put curiosity as one of the things that people were looking for, and I'm interested in knowing more about how you try to search that out, and whether that's even the term you use, through the modeling that you're doing.
Yeah. So that's not something that we've directly looked at on my side, but I think that's a big part of interviewing, and a lot of our interviewing process is based on what are you passionate about? One of the best interview questions that I've heard in a long time is, tell me about the last book you read, and having that. We're looking for people who have the answer that indicates it's not just my textbook. I'm not just going about the world and getting my studies done and I have no curiosity about other things. We want to know, what is, it's because I'm really interested in this author and he's amazing and I love to read about those books, or there's this hobby that I'm really interested in. Having a variety of interest in the world in general is really important, and that's how we study it. We haven't done it through algorithms yet.
But how do you measure, I think, one of the things about curiosity that I heard from companies over and over again was this idea of, are we hiring people who have a growth mindset, right? Mm-hmm. Because if we're hiring new college graduates, traditional higher graduates, they're 22, right? They're far from fully formed. And are they going to come in and stick with us for a long time and grow in that time and maybe eventually become leaders? How do you kind of measure? It's hard to measure that, right?
It's very hard. We don't have an algorithm based on it yet. I think passion comes out in a lot of the interviews, and just being really committed to the things that you to the company. For one, so somebody who joins our company, they're joining a finance tech company, not just a pure technology company. So them demonstrating some sort of interest beyond just getting the job in finance is really important, because it shows that they're committed, that they're going to be here for the long run, and that's something we really care about.
I talked this morning about a number of companies using their internships as essentially a pathway in, because it's an extended interview.
Yeah.
Are you doing that?
Yes.
Okay.
That
is your internship program getting bigger as a result?
Every year it almost doubles.
Okay.
Internships are really, like you said, the new interview.
Okay.
Which is tricky, because that just means even earlier.
You have to
college.
assess these, right? You have to assess
right.
these people.
So everything you do on an internship is evaluated, if not formally, kind of informally.
And do you know what percentage of interns you end up making offers to?
That's about 50%.
50%.
Yep, and that's pretty common.
Pretty high. Okay, we have one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. Yes, Kathleen.
Hi, Kathleen Delaski from the Education Design Lab. We're working with communities that are trying to help low-income students of all different ages get to jobs like the engineering jobs that you're hiring for. Is there any, what we're struggling with is, are there any faster pathways to get there that you would find credible than, the 4-year undergraduate degree and then the 2-year master's? Or how do we get, low-skilled folks to these high-tech jobs faster?
Faster. That's a good question.
Yeah, so there are these new programs called Code Academies,
Yep.
where people attend and they can move through them pretty quickly. And we do actually really care about those candidates. We give them a lot of attention. We try to seek
But do
them
they
out.
also have a degree? Or are you hiring people without a degree as long as they come through those code academies?
I don't think they always have a degree.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'd have to
Okay.
go back to the. We've only hired a handful so
Okay.
far from there, but I do think that's something that we look at. Besides that, I think it's hard to, in a technical role, when it is pretty competitive, it's hard to get your foot in the door if you don't have something in some formal way, whether it's a code academy or a real college degree to get the door opened.
Please join me in thanking Karen for being here.